So that happened. Originally I was a little concerned about this interview, I'm not going to lie. Pure propaganda being drilled right into the minds of people who live in an echo chamber. It's somewhat concerning. It turned out, however, to be the funniest thing I have seen in a very long time, and this honestly had me cackling at my desk at my office. I genuinely can't fathom how the FSB allowed this to happen. The only conclusion I have being that the right hand is not talking to the left, which, for Russia is pretty damn normal. See my video on what caused the collapse of the Soviet Union for how overinflated the bureaucracy really is. That overinflated mess, well, Russia did inherit it, so did Ukraine, mind you, but one of these two countries has managed to rub their brain cells together and move on from kleptocratic insanity. The other, not so much. But let's jump over to the interview. Now, the thing is 2 hours long, so I don't blame you for not watching, but let's look at some of the highlights of this absolute, bullshit, for a lack of a better term, that got peddled. Before we even start, old Tuk Tuk tried to claim that nobody bothered in the West to attempt to interview Putin. Now, this is an absolute lie, but don't take my word for it, or any other major news sources or journalists. The Kremlin itself said so. We're off to a good start. Interestingly enough, the community note that said that the Kremlin said that Tucker was lying was removed from the Twitter post. I'm not calling it X, it's Twitter. I'm not calling it X. So, moving on, let's look at some of the fun highlights, because I won't lie, it's essentially 2 hours of sitting at the Christmas dinner table with that one uncle who thinks he knows everything about history, but in reality, his knowledge extends to tiger tank simping on a level akin to a weeaboo explaining the intricacies of miso soup. But there were some absolute gems mixed in between. Number 1. Putin claimed Russia has become the largest economy in Europe. Which, when you consider the size of Russia, the population, the immense natural resources, the labour pool, makes it really sad that it's number 11. Moving on. Shortly thereafter, Putin brought out that old lie about NATO expansion, and that the West agreed NATO wouldn't expand during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, if you still believe this in 2024, you might be beyond help. But I'll digress. And again, don't take my word for this. Gorbachev himself said in an interview that this was not the case. In his interview with Rossiyskaya Gazeta and its foreign dependencies, he claimed that the question of NATO expansion was not discussed at all in those years and did not arise. Granted, he later went on to say that he felt that it went against the spirit of the agreement, which is, same level as England saying they won the moral ashes against Australia after the Bairstow stumping, but we ignore that. Moral victories and moral diplomacy doesn't count. You either sign the treaty or you don't sign the treaty, claiming 30 years after the fact that morally you are outraged because so-and-so wanted to make some new friends because they were sick of trying to be killed by their old friend. Well, it doesn't count. During a 1990 summit as well, Gorbachev accepted the idea of German unification within NATO, that being West Germany and East Germany, and it was accepted that other countries would be able to make their own choices. Now, this is the fun thing about NATO. It isn't forced membership. Countries choose willingly to join the alliance against Russia, previously the USSR, because of a key reason. And make no mistake, NATO exists because of Russia. If Russia wasn't being an absolute dick all the time to its neighbours, NATO would not need to exist. And the reason everyone keeps joining NATO or wanting to join NATO is Russia keeps attacking everyone who doesn't join NATO. See Chechnya, Georgia, and Ukraine. Also the plans for Moldova that got leaked at the start of the invasion, with Lukashenko standing in front of a billboard with a big red arrow going into Moldova. Honestly, it's the greatest own goal ever in modern diplomacy and politics. To stop NATO expansion, the Kremlin has attacked Ukraine. At least that's what it says. Make no mistake, it does say this. And by doing this, Finland and Sweden have joined or are joining NATO. Go Russia. Funnily enough, Putin said in the interview that the US was not preparing to attack Russia, which is hilarious because TASS reported him saying that Ukraine was the advanced foothold of NATO for its impending attack, with the direct quote, which has been disseminated by multiple Russian and foreign agencies as, We also know who the main adversary for the US and NATO is. It's Russia. In NATO documents, our country is officially and directly declared the main threat to Euro-Atlantic security, and Ukraine will serve as the advanced foothold for such an attack. He said this 3 days before invading Ukraine. This is the problem with lying. You will eventually catch yourself in a loop. Now where were we? Oh right, yes. The interview. Vladdy then tried to claim that he was forced to act following the violence during the Maidan protest, which according to him, his Pat Yanukovych had nothing to do with it. Never mind that he sent the Berkut riot police to, do violence. There's also one video. Another little claim was that Ukraine started the war, which mind you, didn't start in 2022, it started in 2014, by using its air force to bomb the Donbass. Just randomly, apparently, ignoring the fact that, Igor Girkin, who mind you, just went to prison in Russia for, speaking against Putin, walked into the town of Slavyansk with definitely not Russian forces, to definitely not try and attempt to seize land, to definitely not join Russia. One of the biggest hunks of crap that went on in the interview was his rant about the supposed non-existence of Ukraine. Now, slight issue with this, he claimed that the state is an artificial construct created by the USSR in the 1920s. The Ukrainian SSR, in fact, was not an artificial construct, and for a brief period, before the Bolsheviks enacted a Red Terror, the Ukrainian People's Republic and Belarusian People's Republic existed as an independent entity. This is point one where the level of lying can be so easily disproven. Again, never mind that Ukraine has existed in one form or another on its road to independence and statehood for over 1,000 years. The city of Kyiv was a bustling hub, while Moscow was a lump of dirt in a field, and is known as the mother of all Rus cities, Kyiv that is. Something that even the Soviets admit regularly in Second World War propaganda, stating that the city of Kyiv, the mother of all Rus cities, was back in Soviet hands following the retaking of Kyiv from the Germans during this later half of the war. These grade A revisionist crap claims come from Putin's own Wish.com version of Mein Kampf, which is called On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians. Now, I've read a fair bit of this, and well, it's something. If you've got a glass of whiskey, maybe sit down and read it. It's entertaining. Oh boy, it's a thing. We're not even remotely done yet. Like I've said twice now, this interview dragged on for 2 hours. But let's look at some more little tidbits. Putin claimed once he asked Zelensky why the son of a World War II veteran would collaborate with Nazis. Zelensky's father was born in 1947. For those who aren't aware, the war ended in 1945. Putin also claimed Ukrainians see themselves as Russian. This is a propagation of the Little Russia myth. Watch the video on screen that I made for an explanation on why this is hot bullshit. And if you don't want to do that, I leave you with this immortal line on why Ukrainians are not Russians and why they do not see themselves as Russian. It's rather self-explanatory. Further on to that, there's a couple years worth of evidence as to why Ukraine does not want to be part of Russia. But there was one big one, a massive, massive lie, where Putin claimed Poland started World War II. He quite literally said, and I quote, "The Poles overplayed and forced Hitler to start World War II by invading them."
Поляки вынудили, они заигрались и вынудили Гитлера начать Вторую мировую войну именно с них. Почему и началась война 1 сентября 1939 года именно с Польшей? Она оказалась несговорчивой. Гитлеру ничего не оставалось при реализации его планов.
Now, this is a direct correlation of the common line purported by the Kremlin that the invasion of Ukraine began because Ukraine gave him no choice as it was getting closer to the West and preparing to attack Russia. This has been said so many times it is a running joke. I just want to put that into words if you didn't pick up on the meaning there. Putin quite literally drew a parallel between himself and Adolf Hitler. And if the shoe fits. Putin also claimed, and I quote, Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet Union. After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership. This is a half-truth at best, told in such a way as to portray Russia in a better light. I made an entire video about why the Soviet Union collapsed, and whilst President Boris Yeltsin was a signatory, the collapse was by far against Moscow's wishes, and it only occurred following a series of economic, political and military struggles which caused an internal collapse, as the state could no longer support itself. That's the too long didn't read, at least. Watch the whole video that I will put on screen now for a more in-depth analysis on why the Soviet Union collapsed in on itself. But the collapse of the Soviet Union, the trigger, was the failure of the New Union Treaty and the coup led by the real leaders of the USSR at the time, the KGB. Putin also defended the imprisonment of an actual journalist, Evan Gershkovich, claiming he was a spy. Naturally, Putin provided no evidence to the claim he was a spy. Now this last one, I want to preface with I'm not 100% sure. However, I have spent about 2 hours looking for a copy of this quote and I just can't find it. Putin said, "The West is afraid of a strong China, more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important." Now that potentials are the most important bit. Whilst Putin is correct in his statement that absolutely China is the biggest threat to the West, he quotes, or alleges to quote, Bismarck with that potentials are the most important line. I can't find anywhere Bismarck actually said this. Putin likes to make up quotes, and he did it last December when he made up another Bismarck quote. So if you can find any primary sources saying that Bismarck actually said this, please comment below, because I genuinely could not find a thing on it. My best guess is that this has been taken out of context from another quote or letter, with a significant part of that quote and or letter being omitted to give effectively just these 3 lines. Think Churchill's "We will never surrender" speech. It's like saying, "We will never surrender," and then just cutting out part of it and going, Churchill said never surrender. Well, yes, he did say that. That's not the context nor the quote, and I suspect that's what Putin may have done here. Again, half-truths. Half-truths are very easy to peddle because you can essentially lie and say, this is true because it actually happened this way because this person said X, while completely ignoring the context, and this is something that Russia does quite a bit. So yeah, that's some of the quick little highlights. This interview is nothing more than really just a joke. And the simple fact is, the only people who are going to be impressed by Putin's rant about history and medieval history and Slavic history, heavily Russified history, which he has a vested interest in peddling very, very nitpicked and very pro-Muscovite versions, well, the only people who are going to be impressed by this are people who have no historical knowledge on the topic at all. Throughout the interview, Putin actually even starts flat out insulting Tucker Carlson for his failed attempt to join the CIA. The whole thing is really just incredibly sad. The funniest part of it all is that this was the big chance for Putin to control the narrative with, let's be honest, the side that has the ability to truly damage Western support for Ukraine and is currently causing a delay in the provision of arms and aid to Ukraine. And Putin, like I said, spent the entire time ranting about medieval history and making up all manner of hogwash to try and sort of rant his point across. For Carlson, this was supposed to be the defining moment of his career, and instead, he just looks like a defeated and sad little schoolboy. The whole thing's just sad at the end of the day. And I have seen some of, well, the regular crowd of Carlson's flat out turn around and say, the entire time, Putin just sounds like a whiny, woke lefty. Take from that what you will. Thank you to all the patrons and members of this channel. This is just a quick video, and I expect this one to get dinged pretty quickly, and, you know, given the no ads, no monetization stuff. So I appreciate your support. You make commentary on things like this possible, and I really can't thank you all enough. Can't state enough how much I appreciate every single like, every comment, every share. It means a lot to me. Thank you all. Like, comment, subscribe, join the Discord, and I will catch you next time.